Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know, from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars, topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
GSMC Basketball Podcast, right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. It is your host, back at it again, more basketball updates, news, and topics, discussions, all that good stuff, right here on the podcast. And obviously today's podcast has came after some events that have happened in the NBA, as we finally have our final two teams in the NBA Finals. We have finally gotten to the last leg of the bubble. We finally got to the last 2 weeks at max of the bubble, starting Wednesday with the NBA Finals, as the Miami Heat closed out the Boston Celtics on Sunday to clinch their spot in the NBA Finals from the Eastern Conference. And then on Saturday, the Lakers beat the Nuggets to close out their spot in the Western Conference to make it to the NBA Finals. And our NBA Finals matchup is set between the two teams. And obviously, like I said, it's a very exciting time for a lot of basketball fans. And I'm sure it's a very exciting time for these teams, too. It's like, listen, it's probably known mentally, but it's like, okay, the bubble's almost over, guys. We've almost got through it. We just got to push through and try to get these 4 games, and we could be home champions. So this is definitely what you want to see as a fan. This is definitely what you want to hear. This is definitely what you want to get into on both things. But ready for the whole show, we're just going to get into some news and updates around the league. Different rumors, obviously, some things heating up on the outer circles of the bubble. But also, we're obviously going to talk about and break down, we're going to talk about the games, obviously, that happened this past weekend, the results. We're going to preview the NBA Finals, and we're also going to talk about the teams who lost and their future moving forward as well. So all that right here on the podcast. So if you want to listen to all that and hear all that, in my opinion, on all those subjects and topics, stay tuned to this podcast as we're going to get this ship going. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead, discuss the Eastern Conference, since that was the most recent. The Game 6 between the Boston Celtics and the Miami Heat, as the Miami Heat won the game 125-113. And the Heat have done it like they've done it all year. In the way I've even said it's been done. They're in the playoffs especially, they have been one of the most clutch teams in the playoffs. And the thing also about it too is that they're not a team like the Lakers who they can sit up here and blow you out 2, 3, 4 straight games in a row. They're a team that they might blow you out one game, but 2 or 3 of the other games are going to be competitive. And they really won't really extend their lead to maybe a significant margin, like until what they did in this game. It was a close game early fourth quarter, and then the last 5 minutes, the Heat just took complete control of the game and completely ran away from Boston at the end. And, this was just a great game by everybody involved. Obviously, we're going to talk about, the Heat and what happened on their end. Bam Adebayo came out after Game 5 and said, put the game on him. He said, I'm the reason why we did not close out Boston tonight. I played terribly. And he responded to this game with a great game with 32 points and 14 rebounds on 11 of 15 shooting and shot 10 from 11 from the free throw line. He was aggressive from the get-go, and Boston did not have an answer for him. Also, Jimmy Butler, he had 22 points in the game. He had one of his more aggressive games that he's had in this entire series, but he had a big series. Duncan Robinson game 5 threes, his 3-point prowess. Grogic game 13. Tyler Hero and Andre Iguodala coming off the bench was huge for them as they got a combined 34 points off the bench from those two players. Iguodala with 15, 4-4 from 3. He basically went perfect from the field. And Tyler Hero obviously continuing where he left off with 19 points off the bench. And with that type of production, you see why the Heat could be a very hard team to defeat when they have so many guys who can beat you from the field on a consistent basis. The Boston Celtics, obviously, Tatum had 24, did not have one of his best games, only went 9 of 26 from the field, had one of those first halves, and really for the last 3 games, has had a lot of first halves where they've he doesn't come out aggressive immediately. He kind of eases into it. And maybe that may have played a difference, but he finished the game with 24. Jaylen Brown had 26, Marcus Smart had 20, and Kemba had 20. So you would say, hey, one of their 4 out of the 5 top players all had 20 plus. And then Gordon Hayward had 12. And before we get into the Miami Heat and what I expect out of them moving forward in the finals, I want to talk about Boston. Because a lot of people are wondering what's going to happen in Boston. A lot of people are wondering, oh, Tatum isn't good enough, Brown isn't good enough, Kemba, Smart. But one thing we have to look at with this Boston Celtics team is they remind me of the Washington Wizards back when John Wall, Bradley Beal had Margin Gortat and Nene, and then Otto Porter at 3. Because do you remember that Washington team or those Washington teams? What was their strength? Their starting lineup. What was their weakness? Their bench. Their starting lineup basically had to almost average 80 points between them, 80 to 90 a game, for them to even have a chance against teams. If you think about it, outside of Gordon Hayward, if Gordon Hayward did not come off the bench, if we talk about Boston's top 5 players, they combined for a total of basically 100 points. They scored 113. Thias, Cantor, and Williams were the only other people who scored in this game outside of those 5, and they combined for a total of 11 points. Now, what championship team do you know has to rely that heavily on their starters to win? Honestly, playoffs, you don't play your bench as much, but if your bench can still give you about 20 points, 25 points, that's pretty effective. Because, of course, you're going to expect your starters to score like 80 points a game in those types of games. But if your bench can give you 20, 30, that's huge. But the fact that Boston's top 5 players combined scored over 100 points. This roster, if I'm the GM, I'm Brad Stevens, I'm Danny Ainge, you have to find you better big men, because I even saw somebody from a Boston fan account on Twitter say, listen, our big men would be third strings on a lot of other teams. So it's not like our big guys are that great. We don't have much of a bench. Like, really, that was one of the biggest questions with Boston Engineer. Who is going to come off their bench? Outside of Marcus Smart, who originally would play on the bench. Who would come in their bench and actually play and be reliable for them? Wanamaker can have decent moments, but he's not reliable. Grant Williams is more of a defender. Cantor can score, but he's a liability defensively. They don't really have anybody come off the bench. And they don't have... And here's the thing. They don't have to have a dominant big man, but they have to have a big man who can at least, you can say, if we need some points in the paint, they can get us some. If maybe he's a stretch big, he can get us some threes. Tice is a guy who kind of reminds me of Birdman Anderson. You remember him, Chris Anderson, from the old Miami Heat? His job was to rebound and get putbacks. If he could give you 12 off that was fantastic. That's what Thice is. But if he's not getting those type of performances, he's basically just what his stat line says, 6 and 7. And that's not going to be good enough if Boston wants to win a championship in the future. That's just as simple as I can put it to you. If they want to be able to take that next step, they have to fill out their team better. They need more bench help. Listen, if you can't get a whole bunch of big men, just get one. And at least have one where it's like, because basically at the end of games, which is not a bad lineup, But you're having to go small. You're having to go Tatum, Brown, Smart, Walker, and Hayward. And eventually, you can't pay all these guys, so one of them is going to have to walk. But you may not have to pay the big man just as much as him, and at least you still have that solidified center that can play. So if I'm the Boston Celtics, they need to make some changes to the roster for them to truly be able to make it to the finals. Because if not, they're always going to be close, but never there. And then everybody's going to put all the blame on Tatum, on Brown, on Walker, on Hayward, on Smart. And it's just like, you do realize they combined for over 100 points in Game 6 of an elimination game. 5 players, 10 and over 100 points. And everybody else gave them 11. What do you want them to do with that? What do you want them to do with that? If you tell me my starters are going to score 100 points and we lose, then I know our bench did not give us jack anything, unless it's just one of those high-scoring 146 to 150 games. Like, I'm just saying, I just don't think you can sit here and blame Tatum and them for this loss. Yes, they could have played better, of course. But there's still issues they need to address to avoid this situation. Because it'd be nice to know if Tatum was off or Brown was off, we have a bench that can still hold it down. And if they can just catch fire at some point in the game, it'll be enough to get us over the hump because our other supporting cast was able to do enough to get us there. So, that's just what I got to say about that. But like I said, I don't want to take away from the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat has been the most dominant Eastern Conference team this entire playoffs. They dominated a good Pacers team. They dominated the number 1 seed in the East. And they basically, for the most part, outplayed Boston all of the Eastern Conference Finals. Outside of one game, you can literally say they have outplayed Boston most of this series. And that's what's so impressive about the Miami Heat and what they do is because they play together as a team. They have multiple people who can beat you. Butler can have a big game, and Adebayo can have a big game. Dragic can have a big day. Hero can have a big game. It can be all collective effort, 17 here, 20 here, 19 here, 15 here. They play together. They play as a team. And you can't stop that. You can't beat something like that. That's what every team wants. It's like they say with the Lakers. LeBron and AD have to play good for them to win. It's such a luxury, especially for guys like a Jimmy Butler, knowing if I had an off game, it's not a death sentence for my team. I know we can win this game without me doing anything, as long as I make plays somewhere else. Because my biggest thing is this. It's not about, to me, if you got stars that can take you home. It's about if something happened, if you're just off, or something like that. Can you affect the games in different ways? That's what makes you, to me, a very good player. Can you affect the game in different ways? Butler can affect it in different ways. Hero can affect it in different ways. Bam Adebayo can affect it in different ways. And they are very much deserving of this finals berth. Very much deserving of this finals berth. Because they played the best throughout this entire playoffs in the East, and they were rewarded with this trip. And they're going to be massive underdogs against the Lakers, clearly, because they don't even have 2 of the top players on the floor. But here's the thing: yeah, they may have LeBron and AD, but who's 3 through 7? I put the entire Heat starting lineup over anybody else on the Lakers, for the most part. And so if they continue to play the way they are capable of playing, then I think that they should be able to definitely give the Lakers a very competitive series. And listen, people question Jimmy Butler's decision to go to Miami. This is why he went to Miami. He believed in what Eric Spoelstra was doing. He believed in what Pat Riley was doing. And you're seeing it successfully working itself out. And now look at him in his first NBA Finals appearance. Can't beat that. So, there you go. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to switch over to the Western Conference and talk about the Lakers' win over the Denver Nuggets and talk about the future of Denver, but also the Lakers and the preview of them in the finals as well. Stay tuned for all that right here on the podcast. Listen up, sports bettors. This is your man, Brice, here to tell you about my favorite sports book, and that's BetUS. Football, basketball, and baseball are all back, and that means it's time to get down your bets. I only endorse one sports book, and that is BetUS.com. Why, you ask? BetUS is the pioneer in online betting with more than 25 years in the biz. You need a sports book with integrity and longevity, and you need to know that you're going to get paid. You need a sports book that offers everything, including live betting, MMA, golf, horses, esports, entertainment, and all kinds of crazy prop bets and futures. Nobody in the industry gives bigger bonuses than BetUS. Go to BetUS.com now and fill out your information. It only takes a minute. When you get to the How Did You Hear About Us box, type in my name Brice or GSMC Basketball Podcast, and you can get up to 150% in bonuses on your first deposit. Nobody beats that. I bet at BetUS, and so should you. Join BetUS today, and don't forget to type in my name or the show name GSMC Basketball to get up to 150% bonus on your first deposit. That's BetUS.com.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we discussed the Miami Heat reaching the NBA Finals for the first time since, I believe, 2014, when LeBron and the Heat were there. So this is the first time, obviously, just giving appreciation for the season the Miami Heat have had. Congrats to them. Obviously, I also talked about, I guess went on a mini rant, as you could say, about the Boston Celtics. And just, I don't like all this blame going towards Tatum and them, when clearly, if you look at this roster, there needs to be changes for them to be able to take this next step. Because clearly, you've seen the difference. 100 points scored by 5 guys. But the Heat had even scoring Adebayo, Butler, Hero, Iguodala, Robinson. You can't beat a collective effort. That's why it's a team game. And the Miami Heat have basically, even better than the Lakers, have been the best overall performing team to me in this playoffs. I'm not saying the most dominant, but I said from a team basketball, just if you just say team basketball, like the Spurs have always been a great team basketball team. Never was always the best team, but they were always a great team basketball playing team, and that's what I think the Heat were in this year's playoffs, and that's why they are where they are right now. But now we're going to switch over to the Western Conference and discuss the Lakers' win over the Denver Nuggets, as they won 117-107 against the Denver Nuggets, closing the series out in 5 games. Denver fought in this series. I mean, it felt like every game had a similar theme. Kind of close in the first. Second quarter, Lakers get some space. Third quarter, Lakers kind of either stay around what they had from the second half, maybe a little bit closer, maybe a little bit further. Denver gets close in the fourth, might even take the lead, or be very close to taking the lead, and then the Lakers pull away again. That's basically how it's been like. Outside of game 2, and then obviously the series, and then the game they lost, it feels like that was basically the theme of this series. It was just like they almost came back, but they didn't complete it because LeBron James and Anthony Davis would not allow it. And so, if we look at the game, we're getting to Denver first. So, obviously, Jamal Murray was hurt in this game, injured his leg. Didn't look like the same Jamal Murray. Went 7 of 17 from the field, 0 from 4 from 3, 19 points. Grant only had 20 points, which isn't bad. For him, that's good in this series. He actually has had a very good series. And he actually have some news on him real quick. He actually is deciding to opt out of his player option that could get him, I believe, around 10 to 11 million a year. I could be wrong on that. But they said on the open market he could get 14 to 16 million a year, which would be a pay raise. And so I can understand why he would opt out, especially after his performance he had against the Lakers. Millsap with 13. Joker only had 20. Morris had 10. Michael Porter had 10. Dozier had 5. So you look at the numbers, even numbers, but just not enough. The Lakers, on the other hand, obviously LeBron James, monster game, 38, 16, and 10. He took this game over in the fourth quarter. He said Denver will not be coming back. They're not coming back. Not at all. We're ending this here. And they showed it. So, you can't hate on that. He played like the king that we know him to play. Anthony Davis also was great with 27 and 5. Though we want to see that rebound number get up a little high. He's been kind of shortening on those rebounds. But Dwight had 9 and 9 in this game. Danny Green had 11. Caruso had 11 in the game as well. Kuzma with 8. Rondo with 8. But the 2 stars carried the day for the Lakers. As you would expect this Lakers team to how they're built, you would expect their stars to carry them. And so basically, I'm gonna talk about Denver's future because there's been some debate on how good we think Denver can be going into future seasons. We know Jamal Murray is still young and he could get better. Biggest thing from Jamal Murray I want to see is a consistency. He had that explosion in the first round. And he had that, and he really didn't have that same game again till the Game 7 against the Clippers. But the Lakers were able to handle him in the series and keep him from being able to go off too much, especially in Game 5 when they put, well, that was Game 5 actually. Game 4 when they put LeBron on him late, that shut down Jamal Murray, and I think that was big. Joker, he had a tougher matchup clearly because they could throw multiple guys at him. That could pound with him, that could beat with him. And, he still had a good series, but you could see that obviously it wasn't the same as going against, Montrezl Harrell and Zubac. They going against the Dwight Howard, JaVale McGee, and Anthony Davis. I think Denver, moving on to the future, especially if Grant leaves, to me is going to be even more important that Michael Porter Jr. develops into the star player that he has the potential of developing into. When we saw Michael Porter Jr. in the bubble in the seeding games, he looked like one of the best players on the floor. In the playoffs, he never really had a game like that again. He really never really had a game like that again. He pretty much was consistently between about 10 to 16 points most games. So he was their third leading scorer, so it wasn't like he wasn't, from a points perspective, their third best player. But it just felt like, you could see his inexperience on the court. Remember, this is his first real time playing. You could see the inexperience and mistakes. You expect him to get better, obviously, over time. But he has to develop into that third guy. Because Denver technically have 3 stars on their team. Joker is probably, some people consider, maybe the second best center in all of the NBA. You got Jamal Murray, who could develop into one of the best scoring guards in all of the NBA. You've seen the packages that he has of offensive arsenal. Mid-range, get to the rim, shoot the 3, shoot from different angles. His great handles, smooth, crafty with the ball. You see Jamal Murray got it all. He kind of has some of that, a bit of a Kyrie Irving in him a little bit. He kind of has a bit of a Kyrie Irving in him. And so if Porter can be that guy, if he can be that third guy, the thing about him, to me, is he can be the best playmaker of all of them. Because think about it, Murray is more of a great elite scorer. Joker can obviously have big scoring games, but he's more of a passer. Porter has kind of the both. He can be a 20-a-night guy and still get 8 rebounds and 8 assists to me. He has that type of ability. He just has to really get himself into the game, learn the game better, get his basketball IQ up, take the coaching from Mike Malone because he's one of the better coaches in this league. And if they can figure out the fit with all 3 of those guys on the floor, this Denver team has the capability of making it right back to the Western Conference Finals again. I truly believe that. Because they have the potential to get the job done if that happens. People are going to talk about Portland, because Portland wasn't healthy this year. We know what Dollar Dame can do. We know what CJ can do. They didn't have Trevor Ariza. Rodney Hood was hurt. Nurge was basically hurt against the Lakers. Not Nurge, Zach Collins. So, we haven't seen a full-strength Portland team. We think the Clippers are going to be back in it again next year. Obviously, the Lakers. We're seeing other teams and thinking, they'll be higher on the totem pole next year. But the Denver Nuggets have the capability of still being one of the test teams in the Western Conference next year. Now, they also got to make some adjustments to the roster. I'm sure they're going to try to find some more scoring. I'm sure they're going to try. When you're a team like Denver, you just try to think, okay, what held us back this year? If we have to get through the Lakers, what do we have to change on the roster to get through the Lakers? Because right now, you're basically seeing, hey, Joker is going to have his way with the Clippers. Murray can have his way with the Clippers. So we don't necessarily have to change our team to beat them if we have to prepare like we're having to beat the Lakers. So what do I have to do, and how do we have to form this team out to be able to beat those guys? And that's what's going to be the important part here for Denver to figure out moving forward. What do we have to do to be able to beat these guys? And we'll see how it turns out, because they have much potential to be a team of the future kind of team. So, there you go. But now we're going to go over to the Lakers. And obviously, you got to show the appreciation for the Lakers. Lakers obviously took care of business. Every series they had ended in 5 games. They did not allow it to go past 5. They took care of Damian and CJ. They took care of Harden and Russell. And they took care of Joker and Murray. When LeBron and AD both are aggressive, you clearly see how dominant this team can be. This is not an easy team to beat if they're both on their game. And if they can just get enough from a Rondo, from a Caruso, from a Kuzma, from a KCP. KCP, to me, has had a very good series. He was remember at the beginning of the season, we were clowning Quintavious Caldwell-Pope because he was bricking, missing wide open layups. He was just playing terribly. People were calling for him to get traded. And the Lakers stuck with him. And now you see it paying off. He's playing some of his best basketball during the Western Conference Finals. And remember, this the way they're built. They're a big, lengthy team. That's why they're so good defensively. You're not going to bully the Lakers. The Lakers are going to bully you. So you have to use your craftiness and your finesse to beat a team like them. But when you got LeBron and AD, it's going to be hard because they're going to be able to have your way. Personally, I look at the matchup with the Heat, and I'm thinking to myself, they have multiple people they can throw at LeBron. And technically, and really, they only have one person, Miami only has one person they can throw at Anthony Davis. And that's Bam Adebayo. Outside of that, it's basically I'm not even saying that like Anthony Davis is going to be stopped, because that's not going to happen. But, Anthony Davis is going to be able to have more of his way with everybody else on the Miami Heat on the front line than he can with Bam Adebayo, because Bam Adebayo maybe is able to be one of the few big men who can challenge him from an athletic standpoint, and it's not like Anthony Davis can get around him like it was nothing. But, to me, you clearly see it. The Lakers, people are going to sit here and say, oh, LeBron got an easy path. He didn't have to go through Kawhi Leonard and the Clippers. He's supposed to win this finals. He's supposed to win, and if he doesn't, he's a choke artist. And it's like, the one thing about LeBron is he takes care of business when he needs to take care of business. He is motivated. He is ready to go, and you see he is playing at some of the best of his career in his 17th year. LeBron has made a statement this playoffs. People keep saying this is his best chance to win. And maybe it is. maybe y'all are right. It is LeBron's best chance to win. But we acting like next year LeBron and AD ain't going to be back again. And they're still not going to be two of the top 5 best players in the league unless LeBron falls off a cliff. So, I think the Lakers could be right back here again next year. They have the talent. And remember, a lot of these guys they signed are kind of on one-year deals. They can rearrange this roster if they feel like they want to get better somewhere. You don't think they're going to try to adjust this roster to try to be better? They know where they need to get some help. But as long as you have AD and LeBron, you're going to have a chance. And that's what the point is. So I think the Lakers are going to be in good position moving forward. And like I said, they're the number 1 seed. They're prohibitive favorites. They should be. They should be the prohibitive favorites. And we're going to see a clash between LeBron's first team he won a championship and potentially and more likely the last team he wins a championship with the Lakers. And we're going to see if he can bring a chip home for Kobe, if he's going to bring a chip home to LA, and he's going to be able to win his 4th ring and another Finals MVP. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to get into the news rumors around the NBA Association. A lot of things happening. We're going to talk about that, all that, here and more on the podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we discussed the Los Angeles Lakers making it to the NBA Finals. Obviously, congratulating them on the great season they've had up to this point, representing the Western Conference in the NBA Finals. And so they're going to now go against the Miami Heat in what is looked at to maybe be one of the most unlikely but also most exciting series that we've had in the NBA Finals for a long time. I also discussed Denver and their future, what I think they need to do to be able to take the next step, and also some changes maybe that are going to come to the team. But I obviously sit here and I know that they potentially have a third budding star in Michael Porter Jr., and if he can become that player, and Joker and Murray still continue to be better and stars in their own right, Denver's going to be a team that's going to be around for a long time, in my opinion. Now, obviously, last segment, I also discussed Jermini Grant expected to opt out of the Nuggets contract and test free agency, so I just want to go a little bit more deeper and detailed into that. The Denver Post's Mike Zinger reported Grant plans to opt out of his contract through the 26-year-old would like to return to the Nuggets. According to Zinger, $14 to $16 million annually is one estimate as to what he could earn on the open market. Now, I said last segment he might have gotten $10 to $11 million. I was close if he had opted in. He's actually going to earn $9.3 million if he decided to opt into his deal. Now, obviously, one of the big questions if Grant decides to do this is how the COVID-19 pandemic will hurt the financials of the NBA. So could that potentially lower cap space for certain teams, and that leads to him not being able to maybe get that 12 to 14 million that he is looking for, or 14 to 16 million, that he is looking for. So we're going to have to see how it's going to go. And obviously, we can't forget a lot of teams may not be planning to spend this offseason as they try to prepare for the 2021 free agency that's coming up, which is expecting Kawhi, Paul George, LeBron James, all of them to be free agents. But Grant should be able to get more than what the contract currently pays him. And listen, Grant, like I said, he had a good Western Conference Finals to me. He deserves the money. He's always been a player on whatever team he's been on. he's a guy who can kind of give you a spark sometimes. He's a guy who I like to call him maybe a spark guy. He can give you a spark from time to time. He can give you that big game from time to time. He can get heated up in 3 from time to time. He's one of those players I definitely want either coming off my bench or he would be a solid starter for me because of what he can bring to the table. Obviously, he's a big, lengthy, tall defender. You see he was the main defender of LeBron James last series and Kawhi Leonard the previous series. Like I said, he's a 3-and-D guy. He can shoot a 3. He's also very athletic. So he also can move, make some good cuts, some dunks. Good. He's a good, solid player. Grant is a solid player and deserves the money that he does. And like I said, on the defensive end, don't forget, when people shot against Grant, they only shot 29.8% in terms of threes when they were matched up against him. So like I said, he's a great perimeter defender. So he's probably, if not the best 3-and-D guy on the market this next free agency, one of the best. So definitely I think a lot of teams are going to be interested in bringing him in. We also want to mention that the Denver Nuggets, Paul Millsap and Mason Plumlee will also become unrestricted free agents. And Torrey Craig will be a restricted free agent. So obviously we'll have to see what this Nuggets team looks like. I feel like they'll probably let Mason Plumlee go. Torrey Craig didn't really play well in the playoffs, but we'll have to see. He's still a young guy. You might want to bring him back. I'm sure they're going to try to bring Grant back because I think they feel like he fits well with what they do on their team. And we'll see if they're able to make any additions to the roster to try to beef it up for next year and potentially try to make another run when the next season comes back around. Also, we have some big news coming out of Indiana. Victor Oladipo is looking to leave the Pacers. He is looking to move on this offseason, which is big. Jared West of The Athletic reported this. He has 1 year remaining on his deal, but he is looking to see if maybe he's able to move this offseason. That's very interesting because Victor Oladipo has never been a guy throughout his career who's ever seemed like he's a guy who would maybe try to force his way out of somewhere. And it's interesting, with 1 year left, he's kind of like, I might already want to kind of leave this. Does that mean maybe he feels like he's reached his ceiling with the team? Is he not? Is he wanting a new experience? Is he wanting a new atmosphere? We don't know. Obviously, we know Oladipo's been dealing with injuries. So obviously, we don't know. Maybe does that play into it? But now, Jared West of The Athletic actually proposed a trade that potentially could happen this offseason. As obviously the Boston Celtics, there has been some rumors that they may be also looking to move Gordon Hayward. So there's this discussion that maybe Oladipo and Gordon Hayward could be involved in a potential trade, which would send Gordon Hayward back near his home in Indiana, and then obviously Victor Oladipo will become a part of the Boston Celtics team, which I think that would be a great addition for Boston. I think if they wanted to, they could probably, with that lineup, they'd probably go small, a Kemba Oladipo, Tatum, Brown, or Brown, Tatum, depends on whoever they want to put at the 4, and then whoever your center is going to be. So obviously that is something that could potentially happen. Now, obviously, he come back from the injury. He finished the season with 14 points a game. In the playoffs, he got it up to 18 points a game. So he seemed like he was playing a little bit more like the Victor Oladipo we knew in the playoffs. He had 3 20-point games in 4 games, but he was still the third option behind Michael Brogdon and TJ Warren on a team that was set in the first round. And to me, if you watch that series, you kind of saw they kind of depended on TJ first. They kind of depended on Malcolm first. And I feel like that could be another reason Oladipo sees how this team is constructed, especially with Sabonis coming back, because you would technically think Sabonis would be the first option, then Warren, then Brogdon. So it's almost like with him being hurt, the team learned how to play without him, and then trying to reassert him. And then it's not like he's a LeBron-esque, Giannis-esque player where it doesn't matter if the team plays the entire season with him. As soon as he comes back, he's the first option. you could say Oladipo is around those players in terms of talent. So it just depends on how you want to order the team on who we run the ball through first, second, third, and fourth. And Oladipo could be the fourth option if this entire team is healthy. And so that, with lack of playoff success as well, all of that could play a role and a factor into why he may want to leave. He just sees the writing on the wall, and he wants to be a more prominent part. Now, you would sit here and think, well, why would he want to go to Boston? Why would they trade him to Boston if he's going to be the fourth option in Boston? I mean, you never know. Brad Stevens has always been a guy who can work the offense where, yeah, we know who the first, second, and third options are, but any guy can have a big game. They may look at what Miami's doing. Jimmy Butler, you would think would be the first option, but the way they play, he doesn't. You never know if that particular game he's going to be the first option. You never know. There could be a game Tatum could be big, Kemba could go big, Brown could go big, then Oladipo could go big. So it really just depends. So if that's potentially something that he wants to do, I mean, I think they should look into it. Obviously, I would always throw out the Knicks. The Knicks are always willing to trade for some type of player of quality. Problem is, they'll get one player of quality and don't surround it with nothing else, then his career goes down the drain too. So, I mean, if they want to, but that's how that's looking, from my perspective. So, to me, I feel like that's an interesting scenario that Victor Oladipo is already, even with a year left on his deal, eyeing leaving. So I guess we have to see if deeper into the offseason, do we hear an actual formal trade request from Victor Oladipo asking out of Indiana? That's going to be interesting to me if we actually hear, like, hey, Victor Oladipo wants out, he wants to leave, he wants to join a new team. Because, like I said, I don't see Victor Oladipo's personality being that kind of way, but, I mean, listing the factors that I talked about, it's definitely something that I could see happening based on that, because it makes sense. It really makes sense if you think about it. He may see the writing on the wall and say, you know what? I maybe want to be on a... you know what? If you look at where we see Boston and where we see Indiana right now, we don't see Indiana really making a jump in the next couple of years unless they get a transcendent player. Boston is 2 games away, and a couple of years ago, 1 game away from the NBA Finals. Maybe he views it and says, I want to compete for a championship, and he feels like Boston would give him a better chance to compete for a championship. That could also be another reason why Victor Oladipo might want out. Now, listen, again, this is assuming that he may have teams that he may be eyeing. We don't know if he's eyeing anybody. These are all just speculation. So don't take it with a grain of salt. For all we know, he could get traded to the Kings. So we don't know what's going to happen. But the last story before we wrap up this segment, there has been some draft buzz that it may not be Anthony Edwards going number 1 overall to the Wolves, but it'll actually be Lonzo Ball's brother, Lemelo Ball. There is buzz that they will go with Lemelo Ball with the first pick if the first pick is not traded, which is big news when it comes to the draft. Obviously, a lot of people has looked at Anthony Edwards as the consensus number 1, even though they have 3 top players in this draft that could go number 1. But people automatically just assume, especially because the Wolves have D'Angelo Russell, that they would just go get somebody to replace Wiggins because they traded Wiggins, and now they have Carl, they have D'Lo, then you add Anthony Edwards, you think, okay. But it sounds like they might want to add another guard to the mix. And it looks like Lemelo Ball is the guy who could potentially be that. But also, in saying that, Minnesota, based off a Western Conference executive, is not sold on any player. That's just who they're leaning towards picking if they had to make a pick. Because right now, the Timberwolves actually feel some pressure from last year based on the fact that they traded for Jarrett Culver, and he was a complete bust this year in his first year. Now, obviously, I'm one of those people who feels like you can't just say 1 year he was not good, he's done, it was the worst mistake we ever made. But it wasn't a good year for him. And so now they're like, okay, we don't want to mess this up again. So if they trade down with a draft that is considered probably one of the weakest drafts in years, if they take a player that doesn't turn into anything, well, we took him at what, the 8th pick, the players weren't that great this year, can't say we suck at drafting, whatever. But if they do stick to it, Lemelo Ball seems to be the guy that they maybe want, but they are definitely going to try to trade down. Teams to look out for: the Knicks, the Hawks. Those are two teams that want to get Anthony Edwards. So those are two teams that I would look at potentially. It just depends on what Minnesota is asking in return for that first overall draft pick. That's going to be the key always, is the compensation for what they want in return for that pick. So it'll be interesting if there's no trades that happening, because that basically means Lemelo Ball will be part of D'Lo and Karl-Anthony Towns, that combination in Minnesota. But that's all the time we have here on this segment. Coming up next, we're going to preview the NBA Finals, what I think, the prediction on the series, and also some other NBA news right here on the podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we talked about some news happening around the league. Obviously, we talked about Jermini Grant, the breakout star of the Western Conference Finals, had his best series in the Western Conference Finals. He is going to probably opt out of his player option for next season and try to get upwards of $14 to $16 million on the open market. If he had stayed, he would have opted in for $9.3 million. And obviously, you see he's trying to make some money. But obviously, with COVID-19, we'll have to see if the market and the money that is circulated into the league in terms of salary cap is going to allow that to happen. We also talked about Lemelo Ball being the pick that the Wolves would go with if they can't trade out of the first pick. It is reported the Wolves do not want to keep the first pick, but if they do have to keep it, Lemelo Ball looks like he would be the guy they go to. And then also Victor Oladipo, with 1 year left on his deal, has been reported to be looking to get away out of Indiana. I discussed in Boston potentially being a potential place to go. Potentially even the Knicks, as the Knicks obviously it feels like any star to look at. So it'll be interesting to see if the Indiana Pacers do let go of a guy who was a part of one of the reasons why they became relevant once again after Paul George. And especially because, they have all these young stars now on their team. That's kind of pushed Oladipo down the totem pole, especially with him being hurt. And maybe he looks at this writing on the wall and says, it's time for me to go on and choose something new. So that was what we talked about last segment. But now this segment we're going to talk about and preview and give my predictions on the NBA Finals this year, starting Wednesday on ABC. Cheap plug. But, so this matchup on paper, obviously, the Lakers are the favorites. The Lakers have two of the best players in this series on the floor on their team. They have one of the best defensive teams in this entire bubble as well. The Heat have Jimmy Butler, guy who will never back down. Fight, grind, defend, make hustle plays. That's Jimmy Butler. Bam Adebayo, up-and-coming center, one of the most athletic centers we have in the game. coming off a great closeout Game 6 against the Boston Celtics. Tyler Hero, a guy who was playing like he should have been first-team rookie, all NBA rookie. Balling this playoffs. Not afraid of the limelight, will shoot the big shot. You have players on both teams playing to try to win it all. So who's going to win it all? So here are the keys to the series, both teams, in my opinion. I'm going to start with the Lakers. So the Lakers, this is the keys to the series. First, obvious step one. LeBron and AD have to be dominant. They have to play like stars. There's been one game in each series that they've played, and that's always been the game they've lost where they've kind of eased their way into it or didn't get up for a game, and that's the game they lost. Obviously, this is the NBA Finals. You're trying to win a championship. I'm sure you want to win it as quickly as possible if you can. So I'm sure you don't want to win an East walk, especially against a Miami Heat team. But if they play the way they've been playing in these playoffs, they're going to be extremely tough to beat because you clearly see the type of defensive trauma they can bring to a defense. Because it's just like, how do you stop them both when they're both on it? How? It literally is a game of pick your poison. It literally is. And so, if they play like stars, they're going to have a great chance to win this series. Second key to the series. Last series, I always think they always had a good, consistent third. Rondo really played well for them in the Houston series, at the end of the Houston series, and then in this series against Denver. He has been such a revelation for them, giving them another person who can make plays and help LeBron be off the ball. But also, Rondo has made some very timely threes and jumpers. Remember, that was always the criticism on Rondo. He can't shoot. He has made some big shots in this playoffs to help the Lakers hold on to runs and hold on to leads. You know, Kuzma can still have the capability of having a big game. KCP, if he continues to play like he did last round, they're going to be in great position. All they need, a lot of the time, if AD and LeBron are on it, all they need is that third guy to have a good... And the third guy don't even have to score 25. He can score 15, 14, 13, and that's good enough. They can get 15 from one of them, 8 from another, 7 from another, 6 from another, and that's good enough. Because AD and LeBron could carry it for most of the game. But if they can get that consistent third score, they'll be in a great spot. And then Miami's keys to the game, or to the series, is first this. I feel like this is going to be a series with who they're playing. I believe Jimmy Butler has to have his best series yet. Because like he's been able to do. He's been able to kind of have an off game and then they still be successful because someone stepped up. When you're going against a team like the Lakers with LeBron and AD, unless you just truly have a bad night, he needs to try to be on it every game. He needs to try to hit 20 plus every game. Because he needs to be playing at his best if they're going to beat those two guys across the court. If he does that, that will put Miami in a much better position to win. The key is if he does that, and other players step up like they've been doing this entire playoffs, that's what's going to make Miami hard to beat. That's what's going to give Miami the best chance to create an upset in this series. Because if Jimmy Butler does his thing, and if we can even throw Bam in there, if Bam does his thing, you got two guys who, listen, I'm not expecting Bam and Jimmy to score like Anthony and LeBron, but if they could give them some type of a resemblance of 50 between the two, 50 to 60 between the two of them, that's going to be big. Remember, Denver, 2 stars. Portland, 2 stars. Houston, 2 stars. You've seen every playoff series, when one star was off, the Lakers won. When Dame was off, they destroyed him outside of the Game 7. Houston, you saw Westbrook was bricking. You saw what happened. James wasn't enough, especially since they were changing and trapping James a lot. Denver probably, in terms of 2 stars consistent throughout the series, had their most success. That's why the games were always more competitive late, but still wasn't enough. Jimmy and Bam have to play well, but to me, Jimmy has to be the key cog. And then second key to me is Bam in terms of how he defends AD. Because he's the only player, I feel like, in this entire playoffs they have played that can really go in terms of athleticism with AD. Can keep up, can guard him on the perimeter. Because really, Joker couldn't guard AD on the perimeter. It was a mismatch because he had better foot speed. He could bring Joker out and go right around him. Remember, the Houston had no big men. He didn't have to do that. Portland, Nurse doesn't have the foot speed. Whiteside doesn't have the foot speed. And they're not physically strong enough. Bam is a lean guy, but still strong and athletic. Like I said, he's not shutting down AD, but how he defends him, if he can make AD make things tough for him, that's going to, I think, potentially play a big part. And then Bam has to also give his production on his end of the court. Because I feel like it doesn't matter who they throw at LeBron. LeBron going to do LeBron. Jimmy's a good defender. Jay Crowder's a good defender. We know Doug Robinson can't defend. He's a liability in the defensive end. So I think LeBron's still going to have his way. But AD, that's probably their best defensive matchup in terms of the 2 stars that Lakers have on the floor. And they only have, but the thing is they only have one guy for it. So you saw last series how Denver was, when LeBron came out, Grant came out. When LeBron came back, Grant came back. I could see Eric Spoelstra potentially doing that with Anthony Davis. When Anthony's in the game, Bam's in the game. When Anthony's out of the game, Bam comes out of the game. That is something I could really see happening. Because that's their best defensive matchup that they have on him. And so, both teams come into this game. Miami is one of the best 3-point shooting teams. The Lakers are very hit and miss, and a lot of times they're missed from 3. So Miami has the advantage there. But the Lakers are probably going to have the advantage in the paint for the most part, in terms of getting into the paint and making things happen. Another key, and it's not a big key, it's a question. How will that Miami zone do against the Lakers? Because you know they're going to throw it at them. And you haven't seen a lot of teams really run the zone defense against the Lakers. So how is their zone that gave Boston so many fits and so many problems, how is that going to do against LeBron James and the Lakers? Because you think the Lakers aren't a great shooting team. If they can keep the Lakers out the paint because of that zone, that might potentially give them their best chance to win this series because they're able to make if the Lakers make shots, then you just say, you tip your hat to them and say, hey, we did what we had, we tried, you beat us, we can't say nothing. But if they play that zone and the Lakers start bricking the Rees, that's when Miami could make their runs. That's when Miami could do it. And I think Eric Spoelstra, he can't just run a zone through a whole quarter. He has to be very timely with his defenses. It kind of reminds me of what Nick Nurse did last year against Golden State. They ran that box and one in game 1, I believe, or game 2. One of those series, one of those games. They ran that box and one late in that game, and it basically shut the Golden State Warriors down for the entire game. They really couldn't score on that defense. But they already had a big enough lead, plus Toronto wasn't scoring. That's why they couldn't really overcome it. But you see how timely that defense is. They can't just say first quarter zone. They have to timely throw the zone defense at them. Do it when they're not expecting it. Because that's what's going to probably give you your best chance to succeed and get over the top. So those are my keys to the game. If I had to make a prediction on the NBA Finals and who I thought was going to win, I'm going to go with the Lakers in 6. Because I think Anthony Davis and LeBron James are going to be too much for them. And I think that they're going to get enough support from their supporting cast to overcome them. But I would not be surprised if this series goes 7. Because I was debating giving Miami Heat even a 7-game series. But I'm going to go give them 6. And I think But I think this also is going to be a very competitive series to me. I expect this to be competitive. I would not be surprised if maybe there's 1 or 2 blowouts. But I expect this to be overall a competitive series. And I expect it to be highly contested from start to finish. Both teams are going to throw it out there on the line. We forget Eric Spoelstra coached LeBron. He knows LeBron. He probably has some tidbits like, hey, we can do this to him. I know he kind of struggles with that. Eric Spoelstra is one of the best coaches in this league that nobody talks about. And he's going to try to put the best game plans he can, game from game, and adjust game from game to go against that Laker team. And if Miami continues to play the way they have played this entire playoffs together, one guy having a big game, another guy having a big game, the Lakers are going to be in for a long series. This is going to be tough. This is probably going to be, to me, their toughest series. I don't think it's going to be another 5-game series like they've been doing the entire playoffs. I think it's going to go one more game, but I think the Lakers are still going to be victorious and take home a championship this year. And LeBron's going to win his 4th ring and a Finals MVP, even though Anthony Davis could potentially get that Finals MVP as well. But that's all the time we have here in the podcast. Thank you for tuning in once again to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Thank you for letting me be part of your day and allowing me to give you my basketball opinion on everything happening in the league right now. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at GSMC_basketball. Also, don't forget to leave a review on this podcast or subscribe wherever platform you're listening to us on, because we definitely appreciate the feedback whenever we can get it. This is your host, Brice, signing out, saying have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.